Recently here on the Spectre Creative channel, I did a video about getting giant cool gifts for the holidays, whatever holiday you celebrate, and how cool it was when it was a toy, and what kind of went into making those giant toys. And this kind of led into a whole conversation about the Thunder Tank, which is a new item that's being sold by Super 7 at, a high price for a lot of collectors. I think it's like $450 plus tax, shipping, and, cat fees. And this modern Thunder, wait, this is, no, not this Thunder Tank, the Thundercats Thunder Tank. A little bit closer, but still not quite there. Ooh, that one actually looks cool. I'd like to have that, but we're not there yet. There we go, that Thunder Tank. Okay, the one that Brian is playing with there with Mumra and Lino. So it's a bit expensive, and fans have been asking a lot of questions about why it costs so much, and I offered the idea that because of the lower the run, the higher it costs, and people still are asking a lot of questions, and I want to try to address those as a follow-up. One of the big questions people asked online on the comment section was, well, why can't they just put it at retail and put it in the back room? And this way, like other big box items like bicycles and televisions, there's usually just a sticker and you pull it and it says, ask a sales associate and they will go get it for you from the back room. And that way it could be at retail and maybe you could produce more of them and the price would be lower. The other question that came up a ton in the comments was comparing this to some vintage playsets and essentially saying, well, if all these playsets were produced in the vintage era and they weren't that expensive comparatively, especially, even if you take into inflation, into being as a factor, you still got these really great playsets for a reasonable price. And why was it that big giant playsets could be at retail back in the day? Retail does sell big items, and the clerks will come and bring them to you. If you wanted to buy a TV at Target, they don't just keep them all the time on the shelf. They have them in the back room. So let's talk about both of these things. First, the whole back room issue. Well, the cost of space is no different than the cost of retail space, meaning back room space. And having really large items with very big price points aren't going to sell as quickly. And the idea of space in a retail store, a big box store, is that the rule applies to everyone. It applies in the customer-facing area and the back room equally. It's not like one area of the store gets premium allocation for space and the other one doesn't. On the customer-facing side of a retail store, you have what's called a planogram. And I've talked about this in a few videos. It's basically the way items are merched on shelf very scientifically, and they're done that way to both help customers shop, help stock people replenish, and to have expected price points where you would expect them to be. And much like with the back room, the front room, they both essentially have an assigned place for everything. Everything has its place, and the place for everything, and everything in its place. And that applies very much. So on the retail side, the customer-facing side of the store, everything is measured in sales per square foot. Essentially, how much money does an item get based on how much space it takes up in the planogram or in aisle. The more space it takes up, the more it needs to generate. The back room, the stock room, the part of the retail store that doesn't face the customer, that's for employees only, it's the same thing. Space is still measured by how much revenue the item generates, and the space it takes up in the back room is measured just as much as the space on the aisle, the customer-facing area. So it's not like the back room just has unlimited space. Everything has to be organized, binned, tracked, barcoded, so they know where the items are, and they know how many they have, and they know the space it takes up based on the amount of velocity. So velocity, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it's basically a sales equation that says how many sales are done to, basically justify it. And yeah, you could get a computer to try to understand all the different inputs and all the different factors that contribute to velocity. But the bottom line is it really comes down to four factors: the number of sales, the average deal value, the win rate, the number of rates you get, and the length of the sales cycle. So if you're going to try to convince a toy buyer to make a switch and basically change from one item to another, say a pool floaty to a giant castle, it has to do the same velocity. So why did we have so many play sets in the 80s, but we can't have them now at retail? Or, not just play sets, not just castles. I mean, there were, gosh, isn't it interesting how almost every play set in the 80s was a castle? I mean, it was like castle after castle after castle. Maybe it was Masters of the Universe, maybe it was My Little Ponies influencing everyone, but castles were really big. I mean, not all playsets were castles. I mean, some of them turned into giant robots after all. I mean, that was cool too. And some of them were tree forts. Some of them were tree forts for 2 different movies. And then, of course, there was the one that was the giant aircraft carrier. All right, so let's get into this one now that we've talked about the cost of storing items in the back room and how it also has to sort of earn its place. So the USS Flagg is one of, if not the biggest from a measurement standpoint of the play sets from the 80s. It was so big that, in fact, it was designed to fit under a child's bed for storage, because that was the only place you could put it, unless, of course, you were going to leave it in your pool and let it float all summer. Otherwise, it was going to basically dominate your playroom. Now, one of the things that doesn't get talked about that much about the USS Flagg is that it was actually a PR stunt. Yes, of course, it was made to make money and to sell, and some people were lucky enough to get it. And the idea of doing PR stunts to sell items, I mean, that goes back, decades, if not hundreds of years. People have been doing this in different ways to get customers excited about a brand. And the USS Flagg, well, while it was designed to be at retail, the expectations that it was going to sell were pretty low. It was really meant to be an eye-catching maneuver. So here you can see the G.I. Joe planogram and how intense it was. There were so many items back in the day. Getting the Flagg onto this retail planogram was not easy. You'd have to give up a lot of other items. And it did fit, but you can see that you could only put literally 1 unit into the vintage planogram. And that was it. The item was meant to draw you to the aisle. Even if you didn't buy it, you were going to look at it and check it out, and you were probably going to walk away with other G.I. Joe items. And that's what I mean by a PR stunt. It was meant to be kind of a beacon to draw you to the G.I. Joe planogram because it was so huge and so amazing looking. Yes, some people were lucky to get it, but they produced very few of them, and for that reason. All right, so fast forward today, and looking at another big item that I covered in the video from earlier was the sail barge. This is the box for the sail barge that it came in. Pretty big, 50 inches wide, 14 inches deep. It's gigantic. So comparing that to vintage playsets, these boxes were big, but they weren't even close to how big this was. I mean, look at the box for the USS Flagg there. Also, these lines back in the 80s, I mean, if we're looking at G.I. Joe, but almost all of them were seen on TV, from My Little Pony to, He-Man, Transformers, Star Wars was in the movies. I mean, there were things like, that were not on TV, but for the most part, if you had a playset, you were on TV. Another thing that's affected the course of the years is construction materials. The cost of raw goods has skyrocketed because plastic is tied to oil. Not to mention the cost of labor. Most toys are produced in China, and the labor market in China has exploded, especially over the last 20, 15 years. And then, of course, there's inflation. What things cost back then isn't the same as what things cost now. So taking all of those factors into consideration, that's basically why we don't have playsets. And of course, the other big elephant in the room is that we don't have toy stores anymore. Toy stores that were dedicated to just selling toys had the space to put playsets, whether they were as large as the Flagg or sort of more mid-sized like the My Little Pony Castle or the Ewok Village. Without dedicated toy stores that have unlimited space essentially for toy product, when you're now relying on big box stores alone like Walmart, of course there is a toy section at Walmart. But it's only one of many, many different areas, and it doesn't have the highest velocity either. It's really not there to sell toys to adult collectors, despite the fact that we may visit it a lot more. We might go there every day, but most people are going just to buy gifts for holidays. They're not there every single day the way we are. It's really a convenience for holiday gift shopping. So while as adult collectors we see ourselves as kind of king of this aisle and it's almost territorial, this aisle isn't there to cater to us. The sales just don't justify it. We are such a tiny portion of the overall toy industry sales, but because toys are so emotionally powerful to us and it's our hobby, for us, it's much bigger. And there's some properties out there that are bigger than others that have a bigger fan base. The bigger the fan base, the easier it is to do a large item. When you have very small fan bases for smaller niche properties, it just becomes harder and harder to make these toys. I mean, looking at something like Star Wars, which is a global brand which makes billions of dollars, well, it can afford to do big giant items even if they're only sold online, like things like HasLab, and not even sold at retail. Smaller niche properties, like, for example, one of my favorite movies is Hudson Hawk. I love Hudson Hawk. Do I expect Hudson Hawk to be in the toy aisle with playsets and action figures and cappuccino machines? No, not really. It's a movie I enjoy watching, but I really don't see it being toys, even though it does have some, toyetic moments. Although, I wonder if I got this and made a custom Bruce Willis. Okay, I'm getting ideas now. But the point is, I'm probably not going to see a Hudson Hawk action figure line anytime soon, even though I am a fan of the movie and of the property. And again, it all comes down to MOQ. The bigger the fan base, the more you can make. And if you make fewer than the minimum order quantity that a factory requires, well, they have to upcharge for that, and that upcharge gets passed along to the consumer. And that is why properties that have smaller fan bases, big items cost more, because the producer, the manufacturer, can't make as many simply because the fan base is smaller compared to larger fan bases. So that is why we could have giant playsets in the 80s, and fast forwarding to today when you're selling toy lines to adults without kids, without TV commercials and cartoons, it's a little different. I hope this video answered the remaining questions. We'll always take comments below. If a third part is needed, I can always clarify more. A subscription and a like is appreciated because that tells YouTube to share this with more people. Thanks for watching.